From the nation's capital in Washington, D.C., Cole on Congress. The program discussing national issues that affect Oklahoma. Your host, U.S. Representative Tom Cole.
Thank you for joining me today for another episode of Cole on Congress. Today I'm pleased to welcome my good friend Congressman Ken Calvert as our special guest. Ken represents the 44th Congressional District of Southern California. He's a former small business owner who was first elected in 1992 and serves on the House Appropriations Committee. Ken, thanks for being here today, and I always like to start these things a little bit personal, and I probably spend more time with you than anybody else in Congress, because of course we serve on the Budget Committee together, on the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee of Appropriations, on the Interior Subcommittee of Appropriations, and you've been a wonderful friend. I've known you all the way since 1992. You first elected. I had the good fortune of being the executive director of the NRCC, so I can't tell you what a personal privilege it is for me to have you here.
Well, it's great to be here. It looks like you have a beautiful district. I want to get out to Oklahoma and visit.
Well, I want you to start there. I want you to tell our audience a little bit about your Oklahoma roots. We consider you sort of a lost Oklahoman and a lost Cherokee.
Well, my grandmother left Oklahoma right about the turn of the century. She was half Cherokee and came to California, and we've been in California ever since. So basically, we come from Oklahoma, at least one part of my family.
Well, we've sent a lot of Oklahomans to California. We've noticed they've all done better and gotten richer since they've been out there.
Yeah, a lot of them got in the citrus business.
Well, and from the bottom up, from
exactly
the very bottom up. But gosh, there's a whole range of things I want to cover with you. I want to start with a recent trip that you and I were part of. We went on a congressional CODEL, as they're called, or a congressional delegation to Latin and South America to take a look at some of the efforts at drug interdiction and some of the issues surrounding trade. We were in Colombia first, and then went on to Panama and Guatemala, and then ended up in Mexico before the trip was done. And I'd like to get your impressions of how we're doing in Latin and South America and beginning to confront the drug problem, and what are some of the other big issues you see for our country in Central and South America?
Sure. Well, on the positive side, I think Colombia has come a long way. Obviously, a number of years ago, they had some significant problems. The drug cartels were literally, in some ways, running Colombia. That's all changed. President Santos, I think, is refreshing. They're making great changes in Colombia, and looking forward to a free trade bill, I hope, here soon. And the same in Panama. I was very impressed with the Panamanian government and their efforts to fight drug interdiction, or do what they're doing to do drug interdiction and laundering cash. Some difficult problems there. Guatemala, I think we still have our challenges, and we're going to need to help Guatemala and Mexico. I think President Calvert is serious about what he needs to do in Mexico, and we're helping them, but we're going to need to do more work to keep these drugs from coming into the United States.
Well, sometimes we think, as Americans, nobody likes us. And I tell you what, Colombia is probably the most pro-America country in South America. We're their largest trading partner. We've been a good friend of theirs. We stood by them in a very tough time for their country, and this is one of those cases, honestly, where an investment, helping them train their police, helping them get their security up, has paid enormous dividends in our country.
And their economy's turning around, and helping ourselves by passing a free trade bill with Colombia and Panama. We'll be able to increase our exports into both of those countries.
Yeah, Panama, again, another very pro-American country. Obviously, we have a long history there through the Panama Canal. And it was interesting to me when we were there, and that I was asked by President Santos, he said, I know you grow a lot of wheat in Oklahoma, because, of course, he graduated from the University of Kansas in 1972, so he knows our part of the world. And he said, we want to buy Oklahoma wheat. And we've just now inked a free trade agreement with Canada, which is, of course, one of our great foreign competitors in wheat trade. And he said, that's going to give them a 12% advantage over your exporters. And this is real jobs for Oklahoma.
Right. No, it's crazy for us not to get a trade agreement with Panama and with Colombia and with Korea as we help. We need to do some things that will help expand job growth in this country. And I hope that by the end of summer, we'll be able to get these trade bills completed.
Well, I think this is one where the administration, which frankly has not been very pro-trade, because we've had free trade agreements, as you know, ready to be signed, essentially with South Korea, Panama, and Colombia, 2 of the 3 countries which we visited. And I think the economy's tough enough in the United States that even the administration has finally come around to the point of view that 95% of the world's consumers are outside the borders of the United States. We need to have relationships with them.
We've been on the sidelines. Other countries are entering into these trade agreements, like you mentioned, Canada, one of our bigger competitors, a friendly competitor, but competitor nonetheless, and we need to get in the game.
Well, thanks for your hard work on that. I know you've got some legislation, too, that deals with some of the critical infrastructure problems that we have in terms of facilitating trade around the world.
Right. Ports, points of entry in the United States. To improve those ports, a small fee on imports, exports, all the money, 100 cents on the dollar, would go to develop infrastructure in all 300 ports of entry in the United States, throughout the United States, land, air, and sea, land ports, seaports, and airports, to make sure that we help facilitate trade. We're clogging up our ports of entry. As the economy improves, we need to get better grade separations, truck-dedicated lanes, make the ports work more efficiently and effectively into the 21st century. And so I think we're going to get a lot of bipartisan support. Micah intends to do a transportation bill here when we get back. He hopes to start marking it up in May, I think. And so we're hoping to have a freight movement section in the bill.
Oh, so you're already working? You think your legislation might get incorporated?
We're hoping that it'll be incorporated in the transportation bill itself, and would put a lot of people to work, and it would help facilitate freight movement throughout the United States.
That'd be great. Well, let me. We may get back to Central America, but as I said, there's a range of issues I want to talk to you about, but probably none more important than the budget. We've been engaged here in the opening months of the new Congress in an enormous debate over what the budget should be. We all know we're running a $1.5 trillion deficit, that we're going to need to not only reduce our spending, but fundamentally reform some of the entitlement programs that we have so that they actually can survive, and we can keep Medicare and Medicaid and eventually Social Security, not part of our budget or any budget that's been presented, but a problem area we know. So how do you think, number one, the Congress is doing in that regard, and what do you see from the administration?
Well, we need to have this debate. As you well know, Tom, our country is in financial dire straits, and we need to deal with this as quickly as possible, or the consequences can be catastrophic. Either we fix it or the bond market will fix it for us. And so we have an opportunity right now to go across America and talk about a positive way forward. I think the Ryan budget that we're going to be that we passed is going to be a step forward, and we need to have an open debate. Unfortunately, President Obama is not stepping up to have an honest conversation about this. The American people, no matter whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent, deserve to have an honest debate about entitlement spending here in America. As you know, it's 2/3 of the budget. We get in arguments over non-defense discretionary spending, which is a small part of the budget, and we did some significant cuts there. But in order for us to get a hold of the long-term budget problem, as you know, and we've been working together on this budget committee for some time, we've got to talk about entitlement reform. And this is the first time that I know of that the Congress is honestly talking about entitlement reform.
Well, the president, of course, is, again, as you know, in the State of the Union, he first of all appointed a presidential debt commission, the Simpson-Bowles Commission. I don't agree with everything in it, but they did some awfully good work and helped focus the discussion. The president didn't include any of their suggestions in his initial State of the Union address. He didn't include any of their suggestions in the budget that he sent to us in February. This week, he actually finally, quote, began to lay out his plan for deficit reduction. How do you assess what he actually began to put in front of the American people a couple of days ago?
Well, as you know, I think he used an opportunity that he had to go political. Instead of having an honest conversation with America, he decided to to use Medicare and to use the entitlement programs politically to scare, I think, the American public. And that's, to me, regrettable. It's an opportunity lost. We need to come to the table, all of us, to fix this problem for the American people. Young people today, if you ask them, do you think that the same opportunities are going to be there for them that their parents or grandparents had? And there's not that optimism out there. Well, that's not America. And we have a responsibility for the next generation and generations to follow to fix this problem. And we can do it. We're Americans. We can fix this. We just got to get serious about it, not try to paint a pretty picture when there's not one to paint. Just be honest and say, let's figure out a way to fix it, and we can do it.
Well, I think you put your finger on the key problem here when you say younger Americans. The Social Security debate, when we get to that, but the Medicare debate really don't have much to do with senior citizens in a sense, because if you're currently on Medicare, of course, you're going to be able, or Medicaid or Social Security, you're going to be able to keep all your benefits. Nobody's got a proposal there that would hurt anybody that's either on or in the near term will be moving into those programs over the next 5-10 years.
Right.
So this is really about the future of Americans that are today in their 20s and their 30s more than it is about the future of Americans in their 60s or their 70s.
Right. And as you know, because we're the baby boomers, you and I,
we're the problem.
We're the problem. That's going to be going through the system for a number of years, and there's not the numbers of people paying in that we've had previously. And actuarially, it's difficult to make it work, and so we have to make some difficult decisions. But you know what? It's not that difficult. I mean, when we get down to it, we can work this out. As you said, anybody that's over 55 today can continue to get the same Medicare services that they've ever had, and what we're talking about is transitioning into a new Medicare, which is going to, I think, in many respects, be better Medicare, better health care for Americans.
Well, we've got a couple of models, as you know, that we've used before, probably particularly where Medicare is concerned. Medicare Part D, which was passed in 2003, the prescription drug program, Medicare D, is worked tremendously well.
Sure.
And it's given every American choice and competition, if you will. And that thing has come in 40% less than the Congressional Budget Office estimated it would cost. The rates for seniors are low, certainly much lower than they were paying before. The coverage now is essentially universal. I mean, if you want prescription drug coverage and you're over 65, you're going to get it. And in that bill, which we passed, it was the first time we not only introduced choice and competition, but we also, frankly, targeted benefits a little bit so that if you're at the, if you're at the lower end of the scale economically, you're going to get a higher level of benefit than if you're Warren Buffett or you're well positioned. I think most people accept people that can pay a bigger share of the cost ought to be doing that.
Right, right. And it's been well thought out, and it's great. I think we need to have this conversation. And when we go home, talk to the folks back home, we need to be honest and talk about this. And let's get this worked out. We can do it.
Well, while we're in this process of reducing, as you pointed out in your earlier comments, we cut quite a bit of money out of the discretionary budget. But part of that budget is defense. And long before you were on the Appropriations Committee, I had the opportunity when I first got here, and I know you were a very senior member of the House Armed Services Committee. Defense has been a focal point of your career ever since you've gotten to Congress in 1992. And, of course, now you're on the most powerful spending committee that relates to defense appropriations. What are your concerns in terms of defense spending and how we prioritize that?
And I'm happy to serve with you on the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee. Obviously, we need to look at the Pentagon. It's a big part of obviously the federal expenditures, but we have to do it very carefully. As you know, the procurement process in the Department of Defense is broken. We saw that with the expeditionary vehicle for the Marine Corps. We saw that with the future combat systems, $20 billion spent and not very much out of it. We saw that with the new destroyer program with the United States Navy. Obviously the acquisition process for the new tanker didn't go well, to say the least. So we need to look at procurement in the Department of Defense, the civilian workforce, to make sure that we get what we need. But on the other hand, we've got some obligations here too. We've got to reset the force as they come back from Afghanistan and from Iraq. We've got to make sure that our military has the best equipment, to make sure that we have the proper size force to defend this country, because that's our number one obligation. That's, in many respects, why we're here. And so I'm one that thinks that we need to go by this very carefully. Certainly, I think that we can find some savings long term, but at the same time recognize that we still have people around the world that don't like us a whole lot. We have to defend our interests and the American citizens in this country.
Focusing on this, again, when the president laid out earlier his priorities for deficit reduction, we'd already had some pretty significant cuts in defense spending, as you know. Secretary Gates, who Secretary of Defense for both a Republican and a Democratic administration, I think spent his entire career thinking about the security of the United States, actually located $178 billion in cuts. We accepted that, and he invested $100 billion of that saving back in defense. So he delivered $78 billion worth of deficit reduction for the United States going forward, and that did call for some reductions in manpower, for instance. Pretty serious things. I was disappointed. I don't know what your thoughts were when the president said, well, we can do more. We ought to look at another $400 billion over the next decade in additional cuts in defense. And I am very skeptical that that much money can be taken out of the defense budget.
Well, Tom, that's impossible, quite frankly. We, as you know, are going to retire the F-16 fighter, the F-15 fighter. The F-18 ENF fighter that we're using in the Navy is a fourth-generation aircraft. We have to replace it with the F-35. We have to maintain large production. We didn't build as many F-22s as we should have. We're still flying B-52s that were built in the early 1960s, late 1950s. We've got a tanker we've got to replace, the KC-135, which is also built in the same time frame. We're down to 270 ships, the United States Navy. We're down to I think the level was at 1916 level of ships of the United States in the United States fleet. We have to reset the force. As you know, the equipment that we use in Afghanistan and Iraq got chewed up, has to be replaced. We have to retrain our military. All of this costs money, and making these unrealistic claims that we're going to pull $400 billion out of our national defense isn't wise. We have to be there's some savings we can obtain, but we have to be very careful about it and thoughtful and make sure we don't damage our national defense.
Well, in addition to being pretty famous for being cheap with a nickel, because you are, and tough on spending, we also know that getting the economy moving again is a critical part of balancing the budget. You spent all your career before you were in Congress as a very successful entrepreneur, businessman that sort of knows how to create jobs, make things work. What are the things that you think we ought to be doing to stimulate job creation? Because at the end of the day, you don't have jobs, you don't have growth, you're going to have a fiscal problem.
Sure. Well, I know what you shouldn't do. You shouldn't be raising taxes on entrepreneurs. You shouldn't be increasing regulatory pressures on entrepreneurs. And we shouldn't be causing entrepreneurs to go through the problems that they're having just trying to stay in business. It discourages people from investment. I see it every day in my own state of California, where our taxes are very high, unlike Oklahoma. We're envious of you in that sense.
Well, we want to thank Boeing for moving 500 or 600 jobs from California to right around Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma, and tax considerations were a huge portion of that.
Big part of it is taxes. California is the highest tax state in the union, and we see employers leaving places like Oklahoma and Texas because of not just taxes. Regulatory costs is in effect a tax, and energy costs is a tax. California has all this energy, and we don't get it. Not unlike Oklahoma that does a great job of extracting their resource. We don't. And the result of that, it's very costly to stay in business in California, and obviously very costly to stay in business in the United States. And people push their jobs offshore. We have to make sure that we keep our employers in this country. Make sure we don't have unnecessary regulation, don't have taxes that are so onerous that you can't operate, and to make sure we get our energy prices in line. People paying $4 a gallon for gasoline aren't going to be going out to dinner or going to the movies or doing a lot of things that they would rather be doing with their family.
That's I think sometime in Oklahoma we have a very unsophisticated view of California because, as you said, you're in the 44th district. I mean, that's you've got 54 members of Congress. That's about 11 Oklahomas, out there. And people forget sometimes that you're the second largest Republican delegation in the Congress. You have 20 members, 19 or 20 Republican members. So there's an awful lot of conservative parts of California.
They're all former Oklahomans.
They are. We did. Your problems began when we quit sending you people. We
That's
finally
right.
got enough jobs for them at home.
They're going back.
And, well, we're happy to have them, but we don't want to lose that conservative presence in a state as big, as important as California. There's just no 1 out of every 10 Americans, more than 1 out of every 10 Americans lives in California. So it's a pretty important place for all of us.
I remind people, they like to make fun of California, but that's where Ronald Reagan came from. Prop 13, the GAN initiative. A lot of good things have come out of California.
No question.
And it's a great state. We'll be back. We're going to have to go through some changes, some difficult changes. We're kind of a laboratory for America. We can see what we're doing wrong in America and California. And we're going to have to make some difficult changes there, as we're going to have to make some difficult changes here in Washington, D.C.
Well, you mentioned energy. We just touched on it, blew past it, but obviously Oklahomans are extraordinarily interested in all energy issues. And again, that's another place you've been a real leader in Congress. What are the sorts of things, from your standpoint, we need to do as a country to begin to use the energy resources that we have?
Well, we got to go get it. It's interesting, the history between California and Oklahoma. Country western music originated in Bakersfield, California, right in Taft, California, where all the oil people from Oklahoma came out to extract that resource. We have tremendous oil resource in California. People kind of forget that. As you know, Oklahoma and Texas are the largest in the lower 48, and California is third. We are a huge extractor of oil and gas. We could be energy independent in California if we could go and get the oil and gas we have offshore. And we can do it in a very environmentally sensitive way, and with the rigs, you won't be able to see them. They have submersible rigs now. Tremendous resource off the state of California. And I have a bill that would give a lot of that resource back to the state and allow them to keep that money, give them an incentive to allow for that extraction to go forward. And it would employ thousands and thousands of people with high wages. As you know, the people in that oil industry are well paid. And we could use those jobs in California right now.
Well, I think your bill and really the concept behind it of allowing the states to get a share of the energy revenue generated by offshore is absolutely critical. I mean, if you're staging in Louisiana or Texas or Mississippi into the Gulf, or California into the Pacific, even though the waters are federal waters, obviously, you're picking up a significant share of the cost of exploration and production, and that some of that money does need to flow back. I mean, I think that's one of the things that would actually encourage states that have been, heretofore reluctant to see offshore drilling, anxious to do it if it provided direct revenue for their roads and their schools and their needs in their state.
Absolutely, and I'm looking forward to pushing that bill. And as people around the country realize that energy prices are not going to go down unless we get more supply. And we have a responsibility in our own country to get the supply that we have.
What you got any particular views on hydraulic fracturing? We seem to discuss it a lot in the Interior Appropriations.
Well, as you know, hydraulic fracturing has been around a long time. It's been perfected, obviously, recently, and has certainly been very successful. And I believe it's a boon to this country to bring natural gas down from $15 down to what now, $4.
Yeah.
Is
and
extraordinary.
it's not gone up. Well, oil has been shooting up, but there's been so much new supply found inside the United States. It's actually now our most stable domestic source of energy.
It's wonderful, and it's going to help our manufacturing industry, bringing fertilizer prices down.
Chemicals,
all of the byproduct of that. So it's a wonderful, wonderful process. Obviously, we want to make sure that that we don't pollute groundwater. Water is very important to a state like California. But I think we can do that responsibly to make sure that the environment's protected and at the same time we extract the resource.
Another area where you've been a leader is probably one of the hottest and most difficult and contentious issues, particularly in a state like California, and that's the whole immigration issue. You've been a real proponent and leader in this so-called E-Verify system of checking employees. Explain to our listeners a little bit about what that process is and what are the things you've tried to accomplish in that area.
Well, I wrote the original legislation that put E-Verify out there. It was called a basic pilot, then morphed into the E-Verify system. And that allows employers to make sure that their employees are not using fraudulent documentation in getting a job. Basically checks the Social Security number against the name. Very successful, 99.6% successful rate now. That's pretty good for the federal government. And we want to make it mandatory. I'm working with Lamar to put a bill on the floor shortly, and that would make E-Verify mandatory in the United States, basically to make sure people don't use fraudulent documents. I think we can all get around the fact that people shouldn't be using fake IDs and fake Social Security numbers to get work in America. And we need to make sure that when we have high unemployment, especially like this, that jobs go to people who are here legally.
What's been the big resistance to that? It's such a commonsensical idea.
Well, there are a lot of folks that hire people who are here illegally at lower wages, and they're afraid if they have to hire people who are here legally, they would have to pay them more. Quite frankly, that's the fight over.
Well, it's it's a fight we need to have and need to win. It just obviously we have millions and millions of terrific Hispanic citizens. I remember one incident I had around Lawton where a gentleman got up and obviously Hispanic accent, and he said, my my family's lived in the United States since before it was a country. We were original settlers in Texas, and I spent 26 years in the United States military, and people look at me as if I'm an illegal alien,
Well, many of the people that support E-Verify are Hispanic business people. In my district is 40% Hispanic. I couldn't get elected if folks didn't feel strongly that people who are here legally, because it depresses the wages in the Hispanic community. And so many of my supporters are Hispanic, and want to make sure that people give the opportunity to here legally.
Well, we've got about 30 seconds left, so I want to give you one last pop at the tax issue, because I know how strongly you, of all people, feel about the president's call for higher taxes.
Well, from California, if they raise the top tax rate, the federal tax rate, to 40%, plus they want to put, you put the Obama health care tax on it that goes to 45%, and then the state tax in California is 10%. We'll be paying 55% in federal and state tax. You add sales tax, property tax, if you're a Californian, you're paying more than 60% of your revenue. And a lot of folks on the other side of the aisle don't think that's enough. Well, what is enough? And it's going to drown entrepreneurship in America. We have to say, look, we don't tax too much, we spend too much. Let's get a hold of spending.
With that, I've got to stop right there because we're out of time. But I can do a series of shows with you, Ken.
That'll be fun.
Thanks for your service. Thanks for what you do. And
Thank you,
thanks for
Tom.
being such a terrific friend.
Great. Well, great. Fantastic.
Good to have you.
Appreciate it.